Hello everyone, I'm Sam Markell, Extension Plant Pathologist at NDSU, and thank you for joining me today at the Central Dakota Ag Day. In the next 15 minutes, I have 4 videos to show you that we shot in August and September this year. The first one is on Frogeye leaf spot of soybeans. So Frogeye leaf spot was first found in North Dakota this year. The next 2 videos are on Soybean Cyst Nematode, and those 2 videos were filmed by the scncoalition.com. And the last video, the 4th video, is on sudden death syndrome of soybeans. So sudden death syndrome of soybeans was first found in 2018 in North Dakota, but we found it in new locations in 2020. So enjoy the videos, and I look forward to talking to you soon. It's September 1st, so it's fairly late in the growing season. I'm standing in a soybean field in Sargent County, and the field looks really quite good. It's lush, it's green, it's thick, it's all the things that you want when you're growing soybeans. But it does have a disease that's new to the state. It's called Frogeye leaf spot. And Frogeye leaf spot has been a problem in the I-states and the Central Plains and the Mid-South for some time. We've been expecting it to show up in North Dakota at some point, and it has. And so when you're looking at Frogeye leaf spot, at least this late in the season, what you're going to see are lesions. And they're generally circular. They can be a little bit angular. It tends to have a brownish, maybe even grayish center, and it's got a fairly distinct ring around the lesion that usually is dark brown to purple. You sometimes can see some graying in the middle of that lesion. If you flip this over, you often can see gray molding or gray mold of some sort in the middle of that lesion, and that's usually a good diagnostic tool to identify Frogeye. Now there are a few diseases that look similar, Phylosticta for one, but we do know that this is Frogeye, and this is new. So Frogeye leaf spot is seed-borne and residue-borne both. So you can get it in infected seed, but usually once you get it in a field, this will survive on the residue for a couple of years. So if you have Frogeye, you'll be at risk of Frogeye the next time you put soybeans in if you only rotate out to corn or wheat or something for 1 year. The disease can be economically important. It can cause yield loss, and it has in other parts of the country, but a lot of that depends on the time that it shows up and the severity. So we look at it generally starting after flowering all the way maybe up to R4 or pod fill. And if you have it at that point, you might want to think about managing it. Obviously, we're long beyond that, so we're not worried about yield loss this year. We're not worried about yield loss occurring in this field, but it is something that we need to know about. So at this point, we don't really know how widespread Frogeye is. We're out surveying right now to try to get a better handle on it. Frogeye is brought on by conditions that are hot and humid. So we've had a hot and humid summer, so it's sort of not surprising that we had the conditions that would facilitate this disease. It's also not surprising that I'm very close to a shelter belt. Lots of times higher humidity because of lower winds, sometimes longer dew periods. We're out surveying right now in the southeast corner of the state. We're trying to get a better understanding of where this is at. This winter, we're going to be looking at the Frogeye and making sure that our fungicides are effective, because you can manage this with fungicides as long as the pathogen's not resistant yet.
In this episode of Let's Talk Toads, you'll learn why SCN is the most damaging pathogen of soybeans across North America. The Soybean Cyst Nematode, or SCN, is North America's most damaging pathogen of the soybean crop. And there's multiple reasons for its designation as the most damaging pathogen. First and foremost is economics. It's certainly in the over $1 billion, probably multiple $1 billion in yield loss or yield suppression every year. Another reason why it is the most damaging pathogen throughout the continent is how widely distributed it is. It's been found in multiple soybean producing provinces in Canada, in fact all but one of them, and in every soybean producing state in the United States with the exception of West Virginia. It can live up to 10 years or more in the soil dormant without a host being grown, without soybeans being grown. So it's not as simple as not growing soybeans for a couple years to get rid of Soybean Cyst Nematode. Another major reason why it's so damaging is it's so commonly found. In Iowa, where I work, we've done random surveys funded by the Soybean Checkoff, in the mid-90s, the mid-2000s, and then the middle of the past decade. And every time we found about 70% of the fields in the state of Iowa had soybean cyst nematode. Similar surveys had been done in the state of Illinois, and the hit rate was about 80%. And then the final reason is an obvious one, and that is that the nematode reproduces and it takes food away from the soybean plant. That's the ultimate reason that yields are reduced, and the nematode reproduces very well, particularly in hot, dry soils. And so when you combine all those factors together, it is so persistent, so consistent, and so widely distributed that year in and year out, it is the most damaging yield reducing pathogen of soybeans, and it's something that farmers that grow soybeans throughout the region need to consider. Effective SCN management starts by knowing your number.
So SCN was first found in North Dakota in 2003. When did you start to see that on the farm, or when did you hear about it?
The initial detection was only a few miles away from one of our fields, so he had been keeping an eye on it pretty closely, and we started using resistant varieties right away after that.
So did you ever see any yield loss from SCN?
We've been able to have really good soybean varieties that fit all of our agronomic needs, and so it's been good, but we realize that that's kind of a limited pool in terms of how we manage SCN long term. So that's a little concerning. Not as many peaking varieties available that fit our agronomic needs for this area.
So do you feel like the 88788 is working pretty well on SCN?
Putting an 88788 variety out there year after year against those high levels, I mean, you're asking to develop resistance, and so we need more sources of resistance in the commercial lines.
Through the North Dakota Soybean Council sampling program, that's a free service for growers to take advantage of. And so testing early is really the biggest thing, and kind of watching that expand across the state of North Dakota is another really good indicator for kind of when you should be watching out for it.
Yeah, and so the sampling program is a grower-based sampling program, as you know, and so the information that the growers take funnels back into NDSU. We create maps of distribution. And since the start of that program, the number of confirmed positive SCN counties in North Dakota has gone from 12 to 19. And it's all because the growers have been doing the sampling.
And while we don't like to see the spread, it's nice to know where it is so that the growers in those counties where they find it can start doing more of their own sampling, and they can start choosing their varieties with that in mind instead of just continuing to plant whatever they feel like, because that leads to train wrecks down the road. If you aren't managing for soybean cyst nematode, it will get ahead of you.
You know, every time we're out in a soybean field, we're always kind of looking for those anomalies, whether it's a weed-resistant patch that we have in the field or some disease that doesn't look entirely familiar. And so, you know, that's a big part of how we try to stay on top of things on this farm, is just trying to get out there and scout often and regularly, and ask questions when we see something that looks a little bit off.
I think I've been very lucky that we've been managed to catch it on the early side of things and continue to monitor it.
Hello everybody, I'm Sam Markell. I'm an extension plant pathologist at NDSU, and I'm standing in a soybean field, and it's September 1st, so it's late in the season, and behind me is a lot of damage, and this is sudden death syndrome. So I'm in Richland County. We know in 2018 sudden death first showed up. We saw it for the first time, and since then it's spread, and it's going to continue spreading in the state. So I wanted to give you an update on what it looks like, how to scout for it, and what damage it can do. So sudden death syndrome is caused by a Fusarium pathogen, and it's different than the other Fusarium pathogens that we have in the state, so it's not related to Fusarium head blight of wheat, for example. This one just causes sudden death syndrome in soybeans and can cause a root rot in something like dry edible beans. So early in the season, when it's cool and wet, this Fusarium pathogen will infect the roots. And when you have heat in the middle of the summer and you get frequent rainstorms, it's going to facilitate the development of that pathogen. And often by early August, you'll start to see some foliar symptoms. So like many other pathogens that are in the soil, you often start to see this show up in little pockets. So this patch behind me is quite large, but there's other little pockets in the rest of this field where you have maybe just a 5 to 10 foot little oval shaped lens of the disease. This is classic sudden death syndrome symptoms where you have this yellow chlorosis, so it's classic early symptoms. On this leaf, instead of just the yellowing that you see between the veins, you can see, like on this one, you see that it's starting to turn necrotic between the veins as well. So the symptoms are getting a little bit more severe, and eventually the whole leaf will turn yellow, leaving only the leaf veins green and necrosis throughout. So we're going to take a look at this plant still, and there's other things that can do this, right? So brown stem rot can do this, triazole injury sometimes can do this. There's a few other things that can cause similar symptoms. What you want to do when you have a plant that looks like this, and you see all these things, is you want to get into the roots and the lower stem. So I just generally scrape this off, and you can see right away, you can see all this browning under this tissue. And this is all caused by the sudden death syndrome pathogen. It's really important to keep going because sudden death causes a lot of tissue damage to the xylem. So this is the tissue right underneath the outside of the plant. You can see all this browning here. But there's a lookalike called brown stem rot. And so brown stem rot causes very similar foliar symptoms. So we can see right here, the pith in this plant is white. It's healthy, looks pretty good really. And the outside is browning. It's turning that tan brown symptom. So with sudden death, this is very important. You have generally a healthy pith and this browning, tanning symptom on the outside of the stem, right? With brown stem rot, this will be brown. It'll look like lead in a pencil, and the rest of this will be white. So the symptoms are almost exactly the opposite. So after the plant is infected for a while and symptoms get really severe, what you'll see is only petioles left. So in this plant, you can see the petioles are all left. There's no leaves anymore. The leaves have fallen off. So you have to check the roots. The roots are really seriously rotted. You should never be able to pull out a healthy soybean that easily. So you can see that the roots are blackened, browned. There's not much left of them. They're pretty tough looking. Sudden death syndrome and soybean cyst nematode act together. So often when you see damage like this from sudden death, you have soybean cyst nematode. Now you can get them one at a time. You can get sudden death without SCN, you can get SCN without sudden death. And so again, if you see sudden death, I would get in and make sure you sample soybean cyst nematode, and you really want to start managing that right now. If you have soybean cyst nematode, you want to be on the lookout for sudden death syndrome, which is what we're seeing in this field.
A few updates since we shot those videos. We completed the Frogeye leaf spot survey on soybeans, and we found Frogeye in almost every field that we sampled south of a line from Trail County. North of Trail County, we found it only in a couple fields, and it was only at trace level. So we know that it was pretty widespread in the southeast part of the state. The next update I wanted to tell you is that the scncoalition.com continues to film for soybean cyst nematode, and we've completed filming from North Dakota down to Arkansas. And I would encourage you all to visit and take a look at some of those videos at thescncoalition.com. Thank you. Have a good day.